Mazie Hirono isn't simply asking gotcha questions. She's probing whether this nominee can separate political rhetoric from judicial responsibility. And that distinction matters far more than it might seem at first glance.
I ask the following two initial questions of all nominees coming before any of the committees on which I sit to ensure the fitness of the nominee to serve. So I will ask you the following two questions. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
No.
Mr. Smith, on July 30th, 2024, you wrote a post on Breitbart endorsing a Missouri Attorney General candidate. Do you recall that post?
I do, Senator.
So in that post, you wrote, quote, Republican attorneys general are critical in the fight against the radical left. We need true conservatives to defeat the abortion industrial complex, the lawlessness plaguing blue cities, and the woke ideology invading our schools, end quote. Can you define the word woke?
Senator, I was very proud to support my friend who was running in that election. That was a piece of political advocacy, and as I was explaining to one of your colleagues earlier, the partisan views or political activity I've had before would play no bearing on my role as a judge.
Well, you're not responding to my question. Can you define for me what constitutes woke ideology? You wrote it. You meant something. I'd just like you to tell us what you meant by that.
Yeah, Senator, in the course of a political campaign, that was a piece that I put out in support of my friend. But as a judicial nominee, I don't think it's appropriate for me to start commenting on political views because as a judge, I would not be applying those partisan or personal views while I was on the bench.
Well, the thing is that this whole idea of woke ideology and DEI, the president has issued an executive order telling all of his administrative agencies to eliminate any support of DEI. And so you're going to get cases that use terms like woke or DEI, et cetera. And so I think it would be good for us to know what you mean by what you wrote. And you're not going to respond. So, okay, there you go. You've been asked a number of questions by a number of my colleagues about who won the 2020 election, and you testified today that it is the Electoral College that matters in determining who is the president. So the House and Senate was in the process of certifying the electoral votes on January 6th. Do you acknowledge that rioters on January 6th sought to stop this process to prevent Joe Biden from being the president? If that's a yes or no question.
So I understand that the counting of electoral votes was interrupted on January 6th. I want to be very careful in getting beyond too much farther beyond that because there is still active litigation.
I think it's pretty clear what the rioters' intents were, and in fact, if you won't answer that straightforward question. I have another one. Do you also acknowledge that a number of these rioters, some 1,500 or so of them, were convicted, and that President Trump pardoned them? Do you acknowledge that fact? Yes or no?
I think that is what happened, Senator.
So you represented. I'm glad that you actually acknowledged a factual question that he pardoned all these rioters who were very intent on beating up our police here and trying to stop the counting of the Electoral College. So, Mr. Smith, you have represented President Trump in multiple lawsuits in which he has been found liable for defaming and committing sexual battery against E. Jean Carroll. In these cases, you represented the president in his personal capacity. If a case comes before you in which President Trump's personal interests are heavily implicated, will you recuse yourself?
Senator, I've been very proud to represent the president
Well, will you
in those
recuse
cases.
yourself?
I will recuse from any case I've been personally involved in. For any other case, I would consult the judicial canons and the appropriate recusal rules. I may need to consult with my colleagues.
Well, considering the kind of representation that you've provided, President Trump, you do cite the canons of ethics and the code of conduct for United States judges requires a judge to disqualify himself, quote, in a proceeding in which the judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, end quote. I would say that in any case involving President Trump's personal interests, you should recuse yourself because it is very clear where your loyalties lie.
Start with the woke question. On the surface, it sounds simple. Define a word you use publicly. But Hirono's point goes deeper. In today's political environment, terms like woke or DEI are often used as broad labels rather than precise concepts. They can mean very different things depending on who's using them, sometimes referring to social justice awareness, other times used as a catch-all criticism of policies or cultural shifts. For a judicial nominee, that ambiguity becomes a problem. Judges are expected to interpret laws, not slogans. If a term shows up in legislation, executive orders, or legal arguments, a judge needs a clear, consistent understanding of what it means. Hirono is essentially asking, if you've used this term to advocate politically, can you now define it in a way that would hold up in a courtroom?